Leave your wife at home. She's not welcome here, my dad told me. So I left them in a cold house with no SUV or cash. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit. My parents always treated my wife like trash because her dad's a plumber and she never went to college. Then one day, they invited me to a family dinner but told me my wife wasn't welcome. Meanwhile, my sister and her rich husband were coming. That's when I snapped and cut them off for good. Here's how it all went down. I, 31 male, met my wife, 30 female Rebecca, in my last semester of college. I was working part-time at this hardware store to help pay tuition, and she was at the register. She had this no-bullshit attitude that I liked immediately. Didn't take crap from anyone, especially the rich customers who'd come in and treat the staff like invisible servants. The first time I saw her shut down some guy in a suit who was being condescending about paint mixtures, I was instantly impressed. She basically schooled him on paint chemistry while maintaining perfect customer service smile. 3 weeks of awkward flirting later, we were dating. Rebecca came from what my parents would call a working-class background. Her dad was a plumber who ran his own small business, actually pretty successful, with 3 employees and contracts with some local businesses. Her mom worked as a secretary at the local high school. They lived in a modest house in a neighborhood my parents would never visit voluntarily. But they were good people, honest, hardworking, and they loved their daughter fiercely. Their house was always clean, their lawn always maintained, and they had family dinners together every Sunday. When I brought Rebecca home to meet my parents, I could feel the judgment before she even walked through the door. My mom did this thing where she'd smile with her mouth but not her eyes. This plastic expression that probably came from years of pretending to like her country club friends. My dad barely looked up from his newspaper. They asked her questions about college. She didn't go. Her career goals. She was working retail while figuring things out. And her family, the working-class plumber. Each response met with these subtle grimaces, like they were physically pained by her answers. The whole dinner was just them, trying to find reasons why she wasn't good enough for their son. I should have stood up for her more that night. I did defend her a few times, especially when my dad started questioning why anyone would choose retail as a career path. But mostly, I just tried to change the subject or smooth things over. I was still stuck in that mindset of not wanting to rock the boat. Years of conditioning doesn't disappear in one dinner. My sister, 34 female Abby, was even worse. She'd married this finance guy named Jensen right out of college. He came from family money and had the kind of connections my parents drooled over. The type who got his first job through daddy's golf buddy and somehow thought he was self-made. She showed up late to that first dinner. Decked out in designer clothes with a new luxury watch, she made sure everyone noticed by constantly checking the time and adjusting it on her wrist. The first thing she said when she saw Rebecca wasn't "nice to meet you," but, "Oh, isn't that dress from Target?" Rebecca handled it all with more grace than they deserved. On the drive home, I apologized profusely. She just shrugged and said, "I've dealt with people like that my whole life. They think a bank account defines a person." That was Rebecca. She saw through people's bullshit immediately. She wasn't impressed by money or status, just by how you treated others. It was refreshing after growing up in a family where appearances were everything. Despite their obvious disapproval, Rebecca and I got serious fast. We moved in together after 6 months. My parents responded by suddenly forgetting to invite me to family functions. Or they'd call at the last minute saying, "Oh, we thought you'd be busy with her." They'd never say Rebecca's name if they could avoid it. My dad once cornered me at a family barbecue that Rebecca couldn't attend because of work. "Son, I understand the appeal," he said, like we were 2 guys talking about a sports car. "But you need to think about your future. What will her connections bring to the table? What doors will she open for you?" As if marriage was some kind of business merger. I told him Rebecca brought happiness to the table, and that was enough. He looked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. When I proposed to Rebecca after 2 years, my parents couldn't even fake happiness. I called to tell them, and my mom's first response was, "Are you sure you don't want to take some more time? You're still young." Not congratulations, not best wishes, just immediate doubt. My dad got on the extension and asked if we had considered a prenup. I hadn't even told them Rebecca's ring size yet. Despite their reaction, we decided to have a small engagement dinner with both families. Big mistake. My parents reserved a private room at some overpriced restaurant they couldn't really afford, clearly trying to impress Rebecca's parents, or more likely, trying to make them feel out of place. The kind of restaurant with tiny portions and waiters who recite the specials like they're performing Shakespeare. Rebecca's parents showed up in their Sunday best, clearly nervous but making an effort. They brought a nice bottle of champagne as a gift, which my parents promptly handed to the waiter without a thank you. My sister Abby and Jensen arrived 45 minutes late. The moment Abby saw Rebecca's dad, she loudly whispered to Jensen, "I guess the plumber got the night off." I heard it. Rebecca heard it. Her parents pretended not to. I immediately confronted Abby. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She gave me this fake, innocent look. "What? I was just surprised he's not in his work clothes." "Apologize. Now." My mom jumped in. "Samuel, don't make a scene. Abby was just making an observation." That's when Rebecca stood up. No, she wasn't. She was being intentionally cruel. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, thank you for dinner, but I think we should reschedule when everyone remembers their manners." She took her parents' hands and walked out. I followed them, leaving my family sitting there. My dad called the next day demanding I apologize to Abby for embarrassing her. I hung up on him. The worst part? Abby kept using that plumber's daughter line for years. Every family gathering, every phone call, somehow she'd work it in. "How's the plumber's daughter?" Or, "Did your father-in-law fix your toilet yet?" I'd shut her down every time, but she never stopped. She thought it was hilarious. Once at Thanksgiving, she actually brought a plunger as a gag gift for Rebecca. I took it and threw it in their fancy decorative fireplace. My mom was more upset about the fireplace than her daughter's behavior. We had a small wedding, mostly friends and Rebecca's family. My parents came, but they might as well have been attending a funeral. They sat rigid in the front row, barely clapping, checking their watches every 5 minutes like they had somewhere more important to be. Abby showed up in a white dress, the oldest trick in the book to upstage a bride. Rebecca just laughed it off, saying it just showed how insecure Abby was. "She can wear white all she wants," Rebecca whispered to me. Everyone still knows who the bride is. Rebecca's bridesmaids ran interference all night, accidentally on purpose spilling red punch near, but not on, Abby's dress. Enough times that she spent half the reception hiding in the bathroom. During the reception, my mom cornered Rebecca while I was talking to some college friends. I didn't witness it, but Rebecca's cousin later told me that my mom had said, "I hope you know what you're getting into. Our family has expectations. Samuel was on track for so much more before he met you." Rebecca apparently smiled and replied, "The only expectation I have is that he's happy. Maybe you should try that sometime." Then she walked away to join her bridesmaids on the dance floor. When I confronted my mom, she claimed she was just having a heart-to-heart with her new daughter-in-law, and that Rebecca had misunderstood her intentions. After the wedding, Abby made sure to text me photos of all the expensive gifts Jensen gave her for their anniversary. "This is what a real husband buys his wife," she'd write. Or, "Jensen just surprised me with a weekend in Paris. What are you and the plumber's daughter doing?" Walmart shopping. It was pathetic how desperate she was for attention and validation. She'd post pictures of her and Jensen at charity galas, making sure to tag me and add captions like, "So blessed to be part of high society." Rebecca and I would just roll our eyes. What Abby didn't seem to understand was that we were actually happy. We had friends who came over for game nights, weekend hiking trips, and home-cooked meals that didn't require reservations a month in advance. We had the kind of life where you're actually present, not just documenting it to impress others. When Rebecca got pregnant with our son Steven, her friends threw her a baby shower. I foolishly invited my mother and sister to the baby shower, hoping a grandchild might bring out their decency. At the baby shower, Abby hijacked every conversation to brag about her new Hamptons house. My mom ignored Rebecca's pregnancy completely and passed around real estate photos on her phone. Neither bought a gift, but they had no problem eating the food and hogging the attention. The worst part came when gifts were being opened. Rebecca unwrapped a beautiful handmade blanket from her grandmother, who had spent months crocheting it despite her arthritis. As Rebecca was tearing up over the gift, explaining how her grandmother had made one for her when she was born, Abby stage whispered to one of her friends, "I guess when you can't afford store-bought, you have to make do." I'd had enough. I walked over to Abby and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That blanket was made by someone who actually cares about our child. What exactly have you contributed so far except negativity?" Abby turned red and started crying, which of course made my mother rush to her defense. "How dare you speak to your sister that way? She's family." "Rebecca is my family too," I replied, "and she deserves respect. If you can't provide that, you can leave." My mother and sister left in a huff. Dad called that evening, saying I needed to apologize for humiliating them in front of strangers. I told him the only people humiliated were those who behaved badly, and if they wanted to be part of our lives, They needed to show basic respect to my wife. He responded by saying I was under Rebecca's thumb and that I wasn't the son they raised. While all this drama was happening, there was another dynamic at play that I'm not proud of. Despite their treatment of Rebecca, I was still financially entangled with my parents. It started small. My dad would call saying they were short on the electric bill. My mom needed dental work not covered by insurance. Their car broke down. Every other month, it was something new. And I'd send money. Not because I wanted to, but because they'd installed these guilt buttons in me from childhood, and they knew exactly which ones to push. At one point, I even let them use an SUV I was leasing under my name. I added them as authorized users because their old car broke down. We sacrificed everything for you, my mom would say. Or my dad's favorite, you wouldn't have that fancy job if we hadn't paid for your education. They paid for one semester. I worked and took out loans for the rest. The first time Rebecca found a check I'd written to them, $800 for property taxes they claimed they couldn't cover. She was confused. I thought you said they constantly brag about their country club membership. How can they afford that but not their taxes? It was a valid question, one I'd never let myself ask. The answer, of course, was that they were choosing expensive status symbols over basic necessities, then using me to fill the gaps. But admitting that would mean acknowledging how dysfunctional our relationship was. Meanwhile, they flaunted every gift my sister's rich husband gave them. The expensive watch, the cruise, the renovated kitchen. But somehow, they were always broke when it came to basic bills. They'd call me from their newly remodeled sunroom that Jensen's bonus paid for to tell me they couldn't afford their car insurance that month. Rebecca saw through it immediately. They're using you, she'd say. But I'd make excuses. It's just until they get back on their feet. Or, they're getting older. What am I supposed to do? The truth was, I was scared to cut them off. Scared of the guilt. Scared of being the bad son. Scared they might actually be in trouble someday. And I'd have refused to help. It was easier to write a check than deal with those feelings. By the time our son Stephen was born, 2 years after our wedding, I'd been giving them money for years. My financial records later showed it totaled just over $95,000 over the 7 years since I started my career. Money that could have gone to our savings, Stephen's college fund, or just making our lives easier. Instead, it went into the black hole of my parents' endless emergencies, all while they continued to treat my wife like she wasn't good enough to clean their floors. The financial manipulation extended beyond just asking for money. They used it as a tool to control our relationship. If I refused a request or pushed back on their treatment of Rebecca, they'd bring up past help they'd given me. Remember when we helped with your car payment that one time in college? We didn't ask for anything in return then, except they did repeatedly for years. The breaking point with the financial situation came about 6 months before I finally cut them off completely. Rebecca and I had been saving for a down payment on a house, a modest 3-bedroom in a decent school district. We were about $10,000 short of our goal when my parents called with yet another emergency. My dad's personal car needed a new transmission. This was separate from the SUV I had let them use, which was still in my name. Cost? About $2,500. I was about to transfer the money when Rebecca gently said, "Didn't your dad post pictures of their new patio furniture last week? The set that he said cost almost $4,000? She was right. He had. And suddenly the pattern was so clear that I couldn't unsee it. They weren't in financial trouble. They were spending money on luxuries, then using me to cover the essentials they should have budgeted for. I didn't send the money. My dad called 3 times that day, increasingly angry. Finally, I told him I was saving for a house and couldn't spare the cash. He told me family should come first. I realized Rebecca and our future child were my family now, and they definitely weren't putting my family first. I started scaling back the financial help after that. Not cutting them off entirely, I wasn't ready for that yet, but setting boundaries. They responded by ramping up their campaign against Rebecca, as if they instinctively knew she was behind my newfound backbone. Everything changed with one phone call. My parents were hosting a dinner for my sister and her husband. My dad called to invite me, but with a condition. "Don't bring Rebecca," he said flatly. "Just come alone. We don't accept her." Something inside me finally snapped. It was like all the years of excuses and rationalizations just fell away. I saw them clearly for the first time, not as the powerful figures from my childhood, but as petty, manipulative people who would never change. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "All right, but don't ask me for help anymore. No money, no bills, no problems." There was a pause. Then my dad laughed like I'd made a joke. "Sure, son. See you Friday at 7. I didn't go to that dinner. I stayed home with my real family, Rebecca and Stephen. We ordered pizza and watched a movie. It felt like the first free breath I'd taken in years. Halfway through the movie, my phone started blowing up with texts and calls from my parents and Abby. I turned it off and finished the movie. That night, I started going through our financial records. Every transfer, every check, every loan that was never repaid. I made a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and stated purposes. The total made me physically ill. I thought about all the things that money could have provided for my family. The vacations we'd skipped because we were saving. The way Rebecca still drove her old car with 180,000 miles on it because a new car wasn't in the budget. The way I'd freaked out when she spent $200 on a nice winter coat for herself, saying we needed to watch our spending, all while my parents were using my money to maintain their lifestyle and image. 2 days later, I dropped an envelope in my parents' mailbox. Inside was a letter. I listed everything they had taken from me over the years, along with the color-coded spreadsheet. I wasn't asking for the money back. That wasn't the point. I wanted them to see the cost of their behavior in black and white. The letter also informed them that I had legally separated myself from them. I'd removed their names from all emergency contact forms, updated my will that had once included them, and changed our home's ownership so it belonged only to Rebecca. I'd switched my life insurance beneficiary. Every single financial tie connecting us, cut off completely. I included one final note. I had my lawyer send them a cease and desist letter, warning that further contact would be considered harassment and could lead to legal action. From that moment on, we treated any outreach as a potential violation. No direct calls, no messages through friends or relatives. That was the end. I didn't tell Rebecca exactly what was in the letter. I just told her I'd officially cut ties with my parents, and she hugged me for a long time without saying anything. She didn't need to. A week later, my mom messaged Rebecca directly. It was long and cruel. She claimed Rebecca had twisted my thinking, turned me into someone unrecognizable. She said Rebecca would never be part of the family, and neither would our son. She compared us unfavorably to my sister and her respectable husband. She ended with, "We made you and we can unmake you." That's when I knew this wasn't just a family disagreement. This was war, and I wasn't going to fight with rage. I would fight smart. First, I contacted my lawyer and added that message to our file for harassment. We began the process for a restraining order. Not to use immediately, but to have ready. Then I went after everything they assumed I'd never touch. Back in college, I helped them out by setting up a few bills in my name. Figured it'd be temporary. They never took them off. The electricity account was in my name. I shut it off. The heating service? Terminated. Their cell phones were still on my family plan from college. I cut service without notice. Since the SUV loan was under my name and they were no longer authorized users, I contacted the lender, revoked consent, and arranged for repossession. It took only a few days to process. Then I dug deeper. In 2019, my father had applied for a personal loan using my information, claiming it was for an urgent family matter. He forged my signature, missed payments, and when I found out, I paid it off to protect my credit. But I kept every form and receipt. I filed an official report of identity fraud with the bank and requested an internal review. Within 2 days, the bank froze all their accounts, effectively freezing every dollar they had, and initiated a full review. I was told other linked accounts could be affected depending on the investigation's outcome. The bank manager actually called me personally to apologize for not catching the forgery earlier. 3 days after I cut their financial lifeline, Abby showed up at our door unannounced. She looked like she'd been crying, but her face was twisted with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pushing past me into our living room. "They're your parents, Sam!" Rebecca was in the kitchen with Steven. She came out holding him protectively. "Abby, this isn't a good time." Abby ignored her completely, turning to me. "They can't pay their bills. They can't buy groceries. They're sitting in a freezing house because their son is having some kind of tantrum." "It's not a tantrum," I said calmly. "It's consequences. They've been using me as their personal ATM for years, while treating my wife like garbage. It's over. This is all her fault," Abby suddenly screamed, pointing at Rebecca. "She's been turning you against your family since day one. The plumber's daughter couldn't stand that she married above her station, so she had to drag you down to her level." Rebecca's face went white. She turned to take Steven back to the kitchen. Abby actually tried to follow her, still yelling. I grabbed my sister's arm. "That's enough. You don't talk to my wife that way in our home." "Your home?" She laughed bitterly. "The only reason you have anything is because our parents supported you your whole life. They paid for 1 semester of college, Abby. I worked and took out loans for the rest. And every dime they ever gave me, they took back tenfold. It's all in the letter. Did you even read it?" She faltered slightly. "They're old, Sam. They need help." "Then help them yourself," I replied. "You've got that rich husband. You've got that big house in the Hamptons. You take care of them. Jensen's money is for our future, she snapped. Not for them. Funny how that works, isn't it? I said. My money is supposed to support them, but yours is off limits. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She hadn't expected me to push back. Abby was used to everyone bending to her will, especially me. She'd spent our entire childhood watching me cave to our parents' demands, and she assumed that pattern would continue forever. If you don't fix this, she said, lowering her voice to a threatening tone, you're not part of this family anymore. I actually laughed. That's supposed to be a threat? I'm already happier without any of you in my life. Her face contorted with rage. You're nothing anyway, she spat. You and your pathetic little family. Jensen will be a better son to them than you ever were. She stormed out, slamming the door. Rebecca came back into the room, Stephen now asleep on her shoulder. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in years. Never better. And the weird thing was, I meant it. I expected to feel guilty or conflicted after confronting Abby. Instead, I felt clear, determined, like I'd finally stepped out of a fog I'd been living in my whole life. When I cut ties with my parents, I expected it to fade quietly. I completely underestimated how deep their damage ran. It began with my cousin Brandon. After hearing what happened, he contacted me immediately. I've been waiting for this. Then he sent screenshots of texts from my parents dating back years. My father had promised to help Brandon's mom refinance her mortgage after she lost her job. Instead, they convinced her to transfer partial ownership of her house as loan security. The help never came, and when she followed up, they claimed the situation was too complicated to fix. Brandon had suspected for years that my parents were manipulating people financially, but he hadn't realized the extent until he saw the spreadsheet I'd created. It's like they have a playbook, he said during a long phone call. First they offer help, then they ask for something in return that's way bigger than what they gave. Then they make you feel like garbage if you hesitate. It became clear I wasn't their only victim. After Brandon came Angela, another cousin. Is it true you cut ties with them? When I confirmed, she laughed bitterly. About time someone grew a spine. She told me how my dad had convinced her to hand over $12,000 from an inheritance, promising to invest it. The money vanished, and when she brought it up, my mom accused her of being selfish and betraying the family. The stories kept coming. An uncle who'd been convinced to co-sign a loan for them, a family friend who'd loaned them his vacation property and found it trashed, a neighbor who'd been persuaded to invest in a sure-thing business opportunity that mysteriously fell through after the checks cleared. Meanwhile, Abby was true to her word. According to mutual relatives, Jensen started writing monthly checks to my parents. Abby posted smug photos on social media of them taking my parents to expensive restaurants, captioning them with things like, "This is how you treat family," and "Some people understand loyalty." Each post was carefully tagged to make sure I'd see it, even though she'd blocked me directly. But it didn't last long. Brandon's mom hired an attorney. Angela filed a civil complaint. Another relative submitted a report accusing my mother of financial exploitation of an elderly person. Their church reviewed their charity records and found missing funds, receipts that didn't match deposits, and suspicious errors all tied to my mother. She was quietly asked to step down from the committee she'd chaired for years. The same committee she'd used to convince people of her moral superiority. The landlord contacted me next. My parents had forged my signature to list me as a financial co-signer when they renewed their lease, something I had no knowledge of. I immediately sent a notarized affidavit stating I had never consented or signed the lease and included supporting documents showing the signature was falsified. The landlord referred the matter for legal review and reevaluated the lease. When my name was removed, the rent terms were adjusted, and my parents couldn't afford it. As the walls closed in, they leaned harder on Abby and Jensen. According to a mutual friend, the monthly checks weren't enough anymore. They started calling daily with new emergencies. Abby would drop everything to rush to their aid, often dragging Jensen along. He started to see the pattern I'd been trapped in for years. The emergencies that somehow always coincided with luxury purchases. The way they'd cry poverty while wearing new clothes and planning vacations. The subtle manipulations and not-so-subtle guilt trips. 6 months in, Jensen had enough. He stopped writing checks. He stopped taking their calls. Abby and he started fighting constantly, their perfect Instagram marriage showing cracks. But Abby doubled down, using her own money to support them. Money from the joint accounts she shared with Jensen. She was so desperate to maintain her position as the good child that she was willing to risk her marriage over it. In a way, I felt sorry for her. She'd been groomed for this role her entire life, conditioned to believe that her value was tied to her obedience and financial support. Breaking free of that programming is hard. I knew that better than anyone. A year after I cut ties, my parents' house was on the market. They couldn't afford the bills. My father's identity fraud case was moving through the system, threatening actual charges. The money they once bragged about? Gone. Their place at church? Gone. Support from the community and old friends? Gone. They weren't suffering unfairly. They were standing in the ruins of the storm they created. The most surprising part was how quickly their social standing collapsed once the financial foundation was removed. All those country club friends, all those church committees, all those community connections, they evaporated like morning dew once my parents couldn't keep up appearances. It turned out their entire social life had been built on a carefully maintained facade of prosperity and generosity, all funded by other people's money. After all the drama settled, life got back to normal. A better normal. Stephen was walking and talking nonstop. Rebecca's retail job turned into a management position after her boss recognized her talent for organization and customer service. I found a strength I didn't know I had. I no longer felt guilty putting my family first. We finally bought that house we'd been saving for. The day we moved in, Rebecca's parents brought over a homemade dinner and helped us unpack. Her dad fixed a leaky faucet without being asked and installed some safety latches for Stephen. Her mom set up our kitchen with the efficiency of someone who knew the importance of a functional family space. They didn't bring expensive gifts or make a show of their help. They just showed up and supported us in practical ways. Watching them, I realized what real family looked like. Not perfect, not wealthy, not Instagram ready, but present, caring, functional. It was bittersweet to see what I'd missed growing up, but it also gave me hope for what we could create for Stephen. 18 months after cutting ties, I got the news through a mutual friend. Jensen had filed for divorce from Abby. Apparently, the final straw came when he discovered she'd been secretly transferring money from their joint accounts to my parents. Over $150,000 in total. When confronted, she'd thrown a glass at his head and screamed that family loyalty meant nothing to him. The perfect, poised Abby had finally cracked under the weight of maintaining the family mythology. The divorce was messy and public. Abby lost the house in the Hamptons. She lost the Manhattan apartment. She lost the lifestyle she'd based her entire identity around. My parents predictably disappeared once the money dried up. They'd gotten what they needed from her and moved on, just as they had with me and countless others. And then, almost 2 years since I'd last heard from any of them, I got a text from an unknown number. "It's Abby. Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. After thinking about it for a few days, I agreed to meet Abby at a coffee shop near our house. She looked different, older, less polished, wearing clothes I recognized from years before. No designer bag, no flashy jewelry. She wouldn't make eye contact at first, stirring her coffee obsessively with a plastic stick. "Jensen left me," she said finally. "I lost everything." "I know," I replied. "I heard. Mom and Dad cut me off once the money was gone." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I wasn't the golden child after all, just the one with the rich husband." I didn't say anything. I'd learned that silence was sometimes the most powerful response. "I've started therapy," she continued. "Still figuring things out, but I've realized how messed up our family really was. And how I treated you? And Rebecca." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Sam. I was horrible to her. To both of you. I was so caught up in being the favorite that I never realized how toxic it all was." I nodded slowly. Is there any way?" She started, then seemed to reconsider. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I hadn't expected an apology. Part of me wanted to reject it, to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused Rebecca over the years. But I could see something in her eyes that I recognized. The same realization I'd had when I finally broke free. "It'll take time," I said finally. "A lot of time. And you'll need to apologize to Rebecca directly. But maybe we can start with coffee once a month and see where it goes." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." I didn't tell her everything was forgiven, because it wasn't. But I left the door cracked open. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because holding on to anger, even justified anger, was exhausting. And because I recognized that in many ways, Abby had been a victim too. A different kind of victim than I was, but still damaged by the same toxic parents. 2 days later, I received a handwritten letter with no return address. The writing looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I opened it by the mailbox, expecting perhaps more fallout from the family implosion. It was from my grandfather, my dad's father, who I hadn't seen since my teens. The twist? I thought he was dead. He wasn't. He'd just walked away. The message was brief. Someone in town had told him Samuel finally broke the chain. Then he wrote, I left when your father became a man because I couldn't repair the harm, because I saw him becoming who I used to be, and I didn't know how to stop it. I stood in the driveway reading that part over and over, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. My grandfather had been the family mystery, the cautionary tale my parents would reference whenever they wanted to illustrate the importance of family loyalty. They'd always said he abandoned them, ran off with some woman, chose pleasure over responsibility. They never mentioned that he might have had reasons. He'd been living out west quietly, never remarried, completely separated from the family. He wrote that he'd started over in Arizona, worked as a carpenter until retirement, lived simply. He never contacted anyone because he didn't think he had the right. But he'd heard about what happened through his sister, my great aunt, and hoped I wouldn't vanish like he did. He closed with, "If you ever want to talk, I'd like to meet the man who did what I never could." His phone number was at the bottom of the page, along with an address in Sedona. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door if I wanted to walk through it. I didn't know how to react. I still haven't answered him. I told Rebecca, and she simply said, "It's your decision now, not theirs." She didn't push, didn't offer advice, just supported whatever I might choose. I don't know if I'll write back to my grandfather. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But his letter stuck with me. Not painfully, just unexpectedly. It opened a door I thought was locked, and made me wonder how far back this damage goes, how long it's been passed down. The image of my father becoming like his father, who became like his father before him. It was sobering, like watching the same destructive play performed by different actors across generations. But here's what I do know. I have the chance to make it stop. Stephen doesn't know any of this. What he sees is his dad at home, his mom smiling, and the three of us dancing like fools in the kitchen on weekends. He's growing up in a house where people say, "I love you," and mean it, where money is just money, not a tool for control, where family means the people who treat you well, not just the ones who share your DNA. Last month, I ran into one of my dad's old friends at the hardware store, the same one where I met Rebecca, ironically enough. He asked how my parents were doing, said he hadn't seen them at church lately. I told him we weren't in touch anymore. "That's too bad," he said, frowning slightly. "Family is important." I used to think that statement was an indictment, a reminder of my failure to maintain those blood ties at all costs. Now I see it differently. "Yes," I agreed, looking at the paint samples I was holding for Stephen's new bedroom in our new house. "Family is important. That's why I protect mine." I walked away feeling like I'd finally found solid ground after a lifetime of shifting sand.